If we were to listen to just one pioneer's account, we would have to meet the most famous of them all. The man who lived long enough to witness all the developments, all the glory, and all the tragedy of the Old West. A Pony Express rider, an heroic scout, and a faithful friend of the Indians. A man whose bearing and reputation were about to dazzle generations of youngsters thirsting for adventure. He embodied all the legends of the Far West, and above all, the stormy relationship between the Indian and the white man. Barely 300 miles from the Marias River in Wyoming, at the edge of Yellowstone National Park, is a town named after the American Army's most famous scout, William F. Cody, better known as Buffalo Bill. Cody undoubtedly knew the Indians better than almost anyone else of his time.
We met with Paul Fees, historian of the West and curator of the Buffalo Bill Historical Center in Cody, which houses one of the world's finest collections dealing with pioneers and Plains Indians.
There are a couple of things about Buffalo Bill that made him stand out. One is that undefinable thing we call charisma. He was someone that other people always described as handsome, as engaging, as modest. We don't think of that when we think of Buffalo Bill, but we hear other people describe him as modest, and yet somehow magnetic. People were drawn to him. The second thing is, he was absolutely authentic. The things that he showed in his Wild West show or in his stage plays were burlesques of what he had really done. It really wasn't until the 1960s that researchers looked up his real war record in the National Archives and discovered that the things he did were far more dramatic than the things that were portrayed on the stage.
Buffalo Bill became the model for all frontiersmen. In the epic portrayal of how the West was won, his Wild West show was immediately a huge success, especially in the East and in Europe, where people were thrilled by dime novel accounts of adventure in the West. The amazing success of the Wild West show was due not only to its star, but also to the authentic Indian warriors who surrounded him, especially one of them, Sitting Bull, the most famous Indian leader of them all. His name inspired many audiences with terror, but Buffalo Bill regarded him with admiration. Although Sitting Bull's appearance in the show was tinged with tragic irony in view of history, the old scout made his presence a sign of respect and consideration for Plains Indians.
In the time of Buffalo Bill's Wild West, Cody and others thought that the Old West was gone, was past. That was the premise of the Wild West show. The Wild West show showed things that had been, using the real players, of course, using real cowboys and real Indians. But nonetheless, they were portraying a way of life that they said was gone forever. And of course, in a way it was.
In the 19th century, it was widely believed that Indians as a race were inevitably doomed to disappear.
I don't believe Cody believed that, but I do think that he felt that that the Indian way of life was a way of life that they should be allowed to preserve on their own terms. In other words, we shouldn't push them into being civilized. We should allow them to retain their customs and to live their lives as they saw fit.
Because his relationship with Indian people was far different from those in charge of Indian affairs, Buffalo Bill never took part in the government's treaty negotiations. His respect for their way of life made him understand that they might be led, but that they could not be forced to adopt the white man's ways.
Cody was quoted several times in interviews as saying that the most important thing to getting along with the Indian was to keep your word. He said that in his judgment, almost all of the problems that occurred with Indian people were problems caused by the American people breaking treaties or encroaching upon treaties. He felt that the government did not do a very good job of protecting the reservations or protecting the treaties, the hunting treaties.
In 1851, the Fort Laramie Treaty imposed borders on Western Indians for the first time in their history. Deprived of the buffalo, the Plains Indians were forced to gather on reservations, where they became totally dependent upon the federal government. No longer able to follow the herds, the Indians organized their lives on the reservations as well as they could, waiting for the rations and supplies promised by the treaties. In 1876, desperately resisting this attempt to chain the Indian people, Sitting Bull assembled 7,000 Dakotas and Cheyennes. Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer was charged with forcing Sitting Bull back to his reservation. Sitting Bull and his people set up a huge summer encampment along the Little Bighorn River. It turned out to be the largest Indian gathering of all time.
The hills above the river have been set aside as a national monument. We met with National Park Service historian John Dorner of the Little Bighorn Battlefield.
Welcome to Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument. We're at the site of Custer's last stand and the famous Battle of the Little Bighorn in southeastern Montana in the United States. This is a site where Custer's 7th Cavalry engaged 1,500 to 2,000 Lakota and Cheyenne during the Battle of Little Bighorn.
Though his scouts tried to make